मित्रो नमस्कार. पुणे आंतरराष्ट्रीय केंद्राच्या 13व्या वर्धापन दिनाच्या कार्यक्रमाला आपल्या सर्वांचे स्वागत. We are delighted to welcome all of you to this 13th Foundation Day event of Pune International Center. I am Abhay Vaidya, Director PIC. I am honored to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished chief guest, Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, former chairperson of India's largest bank, State Bank of India. Dr. Ajit Ranade, trustee and founder member of PIC, Vice Chancellor, Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, President PIC. Dr. Vijay Kelkar, Vice President PIC. And all of our guests, founder members and trustees, ladies and gentlemen. Precisely 4 days ago, we were witness to a historic occasion. In a rare moment of political consensus across party lines, the Nari Shakti Bill on 33% reservation for women in parliament and state assemblies was passed in this special session of the new parliament complex. When we think of Nari Shakti, we think of our late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, we think of our industry leaders, women in the IT industry, and our highly accomplished women scientists at ISRO, CSIR, DRDO, and elsewhere. Our chief guest today, Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, is right at the top of India's Nari Shakti list. And we are so very grateful to you, ma'am, for your presence here today. As we all know, Arundhati ma'am's accomplishments are legendary. She is best known as the first woman chairperson of the 2 centuries young State Bank of India, India's largest bank and a Fortune 500 company. Under her leadership, SBI grew as a customer-centric, digitally advanced bank. She introduced the first of its kind 2-year sabbatical leave for women employees for the care of children and the aged. She was ranked 25th in the Forbes list of the most powerful women in the world and the 5th most powerful woman in the world of finance. In 2014, Foreign Policy magazine counted her amongst the top 100 global leaders. Such recognition came from Fortune magazine too. Born in Kolkata, Arundhati ma'am grew up in Bhilai and Bokaro. She studied at the Bhilai Project School and at St. Xavier's College at Bokaro, and later graduated with honors in English literature from Lady Brabourne College, Kolkata, and Jadavpur University. Her autobiography, this is the book, it's available at the counter outside, is beautifully titled as Indomitable. And Dr. Raghuram Rajan says this book is about how women can and will succeed in India. Arundhati ma'am will be in conversation with our very own illustrious founder member and trustee, Dr. Ajit Ranade, the well-known economist and Vice Chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. I may mention that our guests at previous Fireside chats have included Shri Narayan Murthy, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, Dr. S. Jaishankar, and Dr. Kumar Mangalam Birla. Throughout the year, Pune International Center conducts numerous discussions and deliberations on issues of national significance. Added to this are events around arts and culture. The best of experts from across the nation speak at PIC's conversations, book launches, conferences, and roundtables. Almost all of these events are free to the public. We have had 2 or 3 deep discussions on the tragic war in Ukraine and its implications for India and the world. At our annual international conference, the Asia Economic Dialogue, finance ministers, industry leaders, and experts from our neighborhood countries, Asia, Europe, USA, South America, and Africa gather in Pune for 3 days every February. National security, energy, environment and climate change, social innovation, economic reforms, and urbanization and science, technology, and the national innovation ecosystem are the areas of research at the PIC. This research is done by our members, PIC staff and students, and faculty from our 57 partner institutions, one of which is the Gokhale Institute. PIC works closely with Headquarters Southern Command, Ministry of Defense, and the External Affairs Ministry. Last year, the Ministry of Commerce commissioned a year-long project to the PIC on India's G20 presidency and WTO reforms. I mention all of this because today is a very special occasion for the PIC family, and our thoughts go back to 13-14 years when our founders discussed PIC as an idea. The rest, as they say, is history. Just a few more words from me. In the words of our President, Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, and Vice President, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, Pune International Center is a Vichar Manthan Kendra, an independent forum for the free flow of ideas and action, and committed to the constitutional values of our democracy and the Charter of the United Nations. When you think a bit, you realize that there is actually no other year-long festival of thoughts and ideas and public policy research in Pune. PIC's work for national development, led by its founders, trustees, members, and associates like all of you, inspires us year after year. With this, I wish to thank all of you once again, and I invite our President, Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, to welcome you and say a few words. Sir.
Let me first of all wish you a happy Ganesh Chaturthi. I want to mention to our distinguished chief guest, Mrs. Arundhati Bhattacharya, that Pune is very different at this time of the year. Lord Ganesha, as we know, is symbolizes knowledge, wisdom, and he blesses Pune like no other city. So welcome to this wonderful city of Pune at this wonderful time. Our beloved Vice President Dr. Vijay Kelkar, Dr. Ajit Ranade, distinguished members of our PIC family, ladies and gentlemen. I want to extend a very warm welcome to you all on this 13th Foundation Day. I was just discussing the significance of 13th, and somebody told me that is entering the teenage or something of that kind. So I think this is very, very special indeed. And I feel greatly honored to welcome you. By the way, I'm not going to call her Mrs. Arundhati Bhattacharya. I'm not going to call you Arundhati Ji. We are so close. I will call her Arundhati. So please pardon me if I say Arundhati to our great chief guest. So Arundhati, I'm deeply honored to welcome you. As you all know, she is an iconic leader, one of the most charismatic leaders that I have met. And very frankly, after Abhivadya has given her bio sketch, it will not be proper for me to repeat some of that. But all that I can say is that her incredible life, her incredible work is beautifully summarized in the book that you will see outside. And the title is appropriately Indomitable. And that's what she is. So please do buy the book, do get her signatures, but most importantly, like I did, read it from the first page to the last page. And it is unputdownable. It is as simple as that. So please do that. And as chairperson of SBI, I think I must halt here. There is a challenge between this chairperson and chairman. I saw that in one of your interview. You know, as she says in that interview, when she took over, as she printed the visiting cards with Arundhati Bhattacharya, chairperson. And the legal department got back to her. And she said, you can't do that. There is no post like a chairperson. And she said, forget about it. She threw away the cards. But now, with your new fantastic responsibility at Salesforce, you are the chairperson there. So that is the difference, basically. And she has sort of metamorphosed, as you rightly said, State Bank of India into customer-centric and digitally advanced bank. In fact, we just had a lunch together, and I was talking to her that there is a difference between digitization and digital transformation. And in digitalization, what you do is you have a caterpillar, you make it into a faster caterpillar and a faster caterpillar. But in digital transformation, you really convert a caterpillar into a butterfly. And that was the transformation you did for SBI, and we have been a witness to that. A couple of personal remarks, because there is a lot on our on the website, so I have to say something which none of you have read. Otherwise, I would not be doing the job. I had the fortune of becoming the chairman of Indian Banking Association's Innovation Awards. Now, I know nothing about banking, but I do know something about innovation, so they picked me up. And I must say that in the first couple of years, I saw that almost 80% of the awards were being taken by State Bank of India of that. So you can see the kind of dominance and change that she made, and her love and passion for innovation I have personally witnessed while talking to her. I was very fortunate that from 2018 she joined the board of directors of Reliance, and I had the opportunity to witness her not only deep insights, knowledge, wisdom, but also her astute interventions, very powerful, very sharp, very pointed, and very effective. And I learned so much just by being with her on the board. I'm very happy that Dr. Ranade, an intellectual giant, is going to have a fireside chat with her. I think there is going to be some real fire here when I'm really very excited to witness that. I'll not say much more and just say that Arundhati, your life is a story of courage, story of determination, story of resilience, story of your indomitable conviction that has broken the gender barriers, and despite the challenges that were faced in a male-dominated bastion, the huge impact that you have made. So, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, being here with us to give us the benefit of your knowledge, wisdom, and insights, and being such a timeless inspirator. You will keep on inspiring generations to come, not only women, men, all of us. I think that's very important. A few words about PIC, especially for Arundhati. As was mentioned, it was born on this day, 13 years ago. It was established as an independent, multifaceted policy research think tank, which seeks to always foster the values enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Our goal is to provide a forum for liberal intellectuals, provide a forum for free and fair public debates, and provide a platform for promoting arts and similar cultural activities. And we gave you some briefing during during the lunch that we had, so you have some idea about where we are. And as we also mentioned, next year we will not be renting a hall, but we'll have our own premises, 7 acres of land that has been given to us by Maharashtra government. We are developing it, and that campus is coming up very rapidly. We also told you about the programs that we have, flagship programs like Asia Economic Dialogue. And we always say that Pune International Center is International Center in Pune. This was something, Dilip Padgaonkar, the late Dilip Padgaonkar, always used to repeat, and we always remember it. And we are doing that. For example, among our flagship programs, the Asia Economic Dialogue, for example, This is the fourth year, and many people are already calling it as the Davos of the East. We like to hear that, Davos of the East, but we'll do sort of better than that. We also told you about several programs that we are having, etc. So I will not get into that. We not only do policy research papers, which actually engage and influence the government. We have made a big difference in the way that work. But lately, we have also done books. Like, for example, we mentioned to you about Rising to the China Challenge, which was very topical at a point in time, as you know, or looking at our future pathways to progress, etc. So we'd like to present those books to you. Can we do that right now? Yeah.
I invite Dr. Kelkar and Dr. Ranade for the photograph.
And with those brief remarks, thank you once again for being here with us all. This is a Sunday evening. I know how Sunday evenings are spent in Pune, but I think this one big name, Arundhati Bhattacharya, and your loyalty and commitment to PIC have drawn you here. So I welcome you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar. I now invite our chief guest, Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya and Dr. Ajit Ranade for a fireside chat.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I am delighted and honored to host Madam Arundhati. I hope I can call you Arundhati. And I've had actually an old association with Madam. I don't know if you remember. She's the one who actually started something called the Economics Conclave, which has become a flagship event which State Bank of India hosts, where even the Finance Minister of India cannot refuse to be one of the speakers. And, there's a famous lady called Christine Lagarde, who is currently the chairman of the European Central Bank, which is the equivalent of Federal Reserve Bank, and formerly chief of IMF and I think finance minister of France, who said that the big crash in 2008 was called Lehman Brothers. It began with the collapse of Lehman Brothers. So she said that if Lehman Brothers was instead Lehman Sisters, we won't have had the financial crisis once in a century. So in that context, Lehman Sisters, one of our sisters here, she was the chairman of the only person, I think, a woman who was the head of India's, the biggest bank in India and among the Fortune 500 companies. And I dare say that at a time when, Madam, you were heading India's central bank, State Bank of India, around that time, half of India's banking assets were headed by chairpersons who were women. Half of India's assets. It's quite a remarkable thing. Today, of course, we take pride that 13% of India's pilots are women, which is actually twice the world average. But let me not get carried away with that. So I want to begin by this question that, as a 22-year-old young person, I believe you got one of the few persons who there's the IAS exam, which is life and death for many people, and there's also the SBI probation, the SBI entrance exam, what's called when you become a probationary officer. So this young woman who graduated from Jadavpur University, before that Lady Brevon College, and very firebrand, I'm sure you are. You got through this exam, and I'm not sure I know too many women who got through this very competitive exam and then you got married. I mean, with due respect, of course, to Mr. Bhattacharya, how is it that I want to understand this early part of your journey where you had gotten through this very prestigious exam and you're chosen to pursue a career with the State Bank of India. But then after marriage, you moved actually to a posting to be with your husband and so on. So this, can you tell us a little bit about your early part of this journey? That it's a very inspiring example because you were able to balance the demands of various aspects of your responsibility and your life, and of course the future is testimony of what you achieved. But this early, how did that happen?
First of all, my grateful thanks for being invited here. Frankly speaking, it's a great honor for me. And with Professor Mashelkar and Dr. Kelkar, there's no saying no. In fact, a few of my friends were asking that, nowadays you always say no to anything on Saturdays and Sundays, and that's what that family life balance, as you say. How come you accepted this? So I said, I was asked by people to whom I cannot say no. So to that extent, I'm very glad to be here. It's intellectually very stimulating to talk to people like y'all. And it's something that really and truly energizes me even to this day. As for the early part of my career, my father was in SAIL, and in those days, SAIL used to have a retirement age of 58 and no pensions. And I was therefore very determined that by the time I became 21, I would be independent. And I was still in my university, completing my degree. But a few months before I became 21, I started taking tuitions so that I would be able to keep my promise and be independent. Of course, my father still felt it was his responsibility. He would still send me a little bit of money. And actually speaking, in the hostel, I was probably one of the richest because I was getting 200 rupees as tuition and then $100 from my father. So $300 in those days for a college-going kid was actually quite a lot of money. And then, of course, came the question of what could my career be. And in those days, there were very few, opportunities, unless you knew people. And my father being in a small tier 3 city, it was not possible for him to have those kinds of connections into which you can get into the private sector and all. So I determined that it had to be either the IS exam or the bank exam. And in the IS exam, unfortunately, I found out that you needed knowledge up to postgraduate level in any subject which was not a language. And unfortunately, I was studying English literature. Okay, so there was no way that I could do the IAS unless I did some extra study for a year and a half outside of college, and I didn't have time. So the next best was the bank exam. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I really aced the bank exam was because of the tuitions that I was taking. Because I was tutoring 2 young girls, and their father had told me that their only biggest problem is maths. So he had said, your responsibility is to ensure that they do well in maths. So what I used to do 5 days a week, for half an hour, I would do mental maths with them. So, give them mental maths problems. And I believe that is what actually prepared me for the SBI exam. Because there were no guides, there were no counseling centers or teaching centers in those days for these exams. You just had to, do it on your own. So, of course, for general knowledge, you can always read all those, newspapers and things like that. English was the other subject which I didn't need to study up. But logic was a subject that you needed to do well, and you needed to do it very fast because speed matters in these exams. And I think, that 6 months of mental maths that I did with my students, they stood in very good stead for me, and I got through in the exams. Subsequent to that, of course, one thing I found that, frankly speaking, society is something that has a lot of bearing on the way you conduct yourself and the way you manage. I was, frankly speaking, in a male bastion. I remember the gentleman who took my orientation in SBI calling me aside and telling me that, you are a very young person And though it is not believable now, but I was only 39 kgs at that point of time. It's difficult to believe, I know, but it's the truth. Okay. And being such a, young person and, not having that kind of personality, so to speak, so he suggested that I wear a sari, okay, when I go into office and not some other outfit. And I realized at that point of time that, it is important in a male bastion also to somehow or the other establish an image that would be respected. And somehow, it is always good if you have a family life that sort of backs you up. My family then didn't stay with me. Obviously, my father was in the Bokaro Steel and I was in Calcutta. So I think marriage was something that was a kind of a natural outcome of all of this. Fortunately, I would say, or unfortunately, whichever way you find it, my husband was of a kind who was, very content with whatever he was doing. He was one of the founding professors of the IIT Kharagpur Computer Science Engineering Department, and Mr. Deshpande over here was the second batch of students to come out from there. So he was very content in his area. And one thing he did tell me later on, that when I married a bank person, I always thought that these people never get transferred and that, your work ends at 2 o'clock. So by the time I come home, I would have, for dinner, I would have a home cooked garam garam roti and everything. And instead, he found
little did he know.
yeah, he had no idea at all that I would be coming home at 9 in the night and the garam rotis were, far off. So the fact of the matter is, but he adjusted to it. And I think one thing that really helped me was his feeling that I was very serious about my career. And because of that, he said that I thought that you needed the space and the opportunity, whereas I had a professional degree. So I could afford to sort of do other things. But you were so immersed in your career, I believed that, if given the right opportunity, you would be able to go up. And therefore, he gave me a lot of space actually. Never ever questioned the fact that, I was coming home so late. Never ever questioned the fact that I had to travel around so much. In fact, while coming back from IIT, he used to pick me up in a scooter and we'd go back home. And one of those days, he wasn't turning up. So suddenly I got a phone call from him, and from the other side, he was whispering and saying, "Do you think I need to call the police?" I was startled. Why is he talking about calling the police? I said, "What happened?" He said, "No, I came, to your office, and actually, he would just stand behind my room and blow the horn, and I would come out." And he said, "Y'all were shouting so much inside, I thought there was a fight going on. So I came back to the institute and I'm calling you, asking what is going on. Is there a big fight or something?" So I said, "No, that's normal. That's what I do with my unions every day. Please come back and take me. It's all done." So he said, "You shout like that every day." So I said, "Well, that's the way it happens, when you have a very unionized kind of institution. You once in a while you get into a shouting match with them. That's okay. That's all right for me."
So anyway, you can imagine it's public sector bank and Bengal, so they're shouting.
Actually, I had card-carrying members as my union secretary. So they were very, very, what should I say, very, very aggressive. And one of the reasons a lot of people ask me, how is it that you can speak so loudly? They taught me to speak loudly, otherwise I wouldn't be heard. I had to shout so that I would be heard above their noise.
So this was a time when Mr. Talwar was still there?
No.
This is post Talwar.
Just left.
But at that time in your life, did you think that you had a chance to make it to the very top?
So actually, during orientation classes in Hyderabad, we joined in the staff college in Hyderabad, all of us together, just like it used to happen in the IS. And a lot of our top bosses used to come and address us. And one of them said that, all of our chairmen have sat in the places that you are sitting in. And I'm sure, that night, all of us in the batch thought that, wow, you don't know, maybe someday I could be the one. But I think, that thought receded once we went into the branches, because the branches were such a, firefighting exercise on a daily basis, that then it becomes.
Which was your first rural posting?
My first rural posting was Chinsuda, actually. Okay, and it was a strange posting because the branch manager there, by the way, was a very, very empathetic branch manager. And he really means related to the woes of the farmers. And what he had done was given a lot of loans, but in the process, he had not followed what is called process in the bank. That means you had a lot of documents which were not properly filled in, and they all had the thumbprints of the borrowers with the purchase inside. But you didn't know which thumbprint belonged to which purchase. And we were told, given the job, that you go and fill up all the documents and ensure that everything is in order. The first time I opened one of these, not folders, these cupboards, all of the files just cascaded down on me, with the purchase going somewhere else and the document somewhere else, and I didn't know how to match up one with the other.
This wasn't very yes minister, right?
Yeah, it was one of those moments, when I realized actually how difficult it was to manage a bank with such great social responsibilities and so little technology. So little technology, everything had to be done by hand. And, maybe my love for technology started from those days, because I realized that, the problems of India can never be solved manually. It has to be technology that will be the solution.
Was this around the time when the officers went on strike not to wear a tie?
That was a little before my time.
So because as a lady, you wouldn't have to comply.
No, but there is a story about the tie. When I was a GM, we had one of these offsites, okay? And in the offsite, as usual, they divide us into little groups and have competitions and stuff like that. And I found on the very first day that all the gifts were ties, okay? And I was a little upset, and I told the chairman then that if I win something, will I also be given a tie? And he was very nonchalant about it. He said, yeah, so what? You go and give it to your husband. So I said, why should I give it to my husband? If I manage to win a tie, believe me, the next day I will appear in a sari and a tie. Okay? That's what I'm going to do. And by luck, it so happened next day our team did win a prize. And I got a string of pearls instead. He had taken the trouble of sending out people to get a few strings of pearls. And this was Hyderabad, where pearls are normal. To get a string of pearls just in case some women won the thing.
I mean, the audience should know, by the way, State Bank of India was the first, I think the only banks which led a national movement against the tie. There was an first officer strike that we will not wear. Sorry, I mean anyway, so a little more serious. See, I'm jumping ahead now. The State Bank of India is an amazing institution. They just celebrated 200 years, I think, was it 10 years ago?
No, 17 years now.
17 years ago, yeah. So
217.
So it was, it's 200 years. Amazing. We have a board member here, as you know. Now the thing is that such a big bank, which even today you have 1/4 of all of India's banking. See, India is a bank-dominated country. Okay, all said and done, despite fintech, despite Aadhaar, despite whatever, we still are a bank-dominated country. Meaning, much of the financial needs of the save depositors as well as borrowers. And 25%, 1/4 of banking assets or loans or deposits is still with is State Bank of India, and you were the head of that bank for 4 years, which is a very long period, by the way, very unusual for State Bank of India. So I am told that every Wednesday you used to have a credit committee meeting, right? And you kind of routinely just, aisa chutki mein, you just sanction 5,000 crores of loans. 5,000 crores is like a very small change. So I want to know a little bit about this process for our audience. That how did that go? I'm sure you, I mean, there must have been, on the one hand, because public sector banks, you have social objectives, but you have to be economically also profitable. You have to keep your ratios low. I mean, the non-performing loans. So how did this process, how did this process work? How were you able to sanction such large quantities of loans, meeting social objectives at the same time keeping economic profitability?
So, actually speaking, the time when I headed the bank, uh, it was in a crisis. It was in a crisis, as you know, because of the NPAs that had piled up.
So after the taper tantrum, right, 2013.
Yeah. It was just after the taper tantrums. But more than the taper tantrums, what had happened was immediately post the Lehman crisis, there had been a lot of loosening of policy. Okay. There were also a number of reports, the 5-year plan reports, etc., which predicted a lot of growth that was coming India's way. And one of the major obstacles to growth that was envisaged was infrastructure, which, by the way, is true even today. But the kind of assessments that were made for infrastructure was of an order which didn't really ultimately come true at that point of time. The other thing that you have to remember was that the banks had 10-year money, whereas infra projects normally cannot be funded by 10-year money. Okay, if you look at the road projects were given for 30 years. Now there is, means the government is not being altruistic by giving a road project, giving a concession for 30 years. Why do they give 30 years? Because any infrastructure, when you build it, it takes time for the cash flow to go up. So the installments in the beginning are less, and at the end it can be more, and then you repay the project by about, say, 22, 23 years, and then you have 6 or 7 years of profit. Okay, so that was the idea. But what happened was, when we were actually allocating out these infra projects, whether they be roads, whether they be ports, whether they be power generation, there was not enough planning and understanding of the risks that were there in that particular sector. Power sector, for instance, let me tell you, if you look at Turkey, the first thing that got privatized in the power sector in Turkey was distribution. Then it was transmission, and then it was generation. What happened in our case? Ulta. We did generation privatization first, transmission and distribution is still to be privatized completely. Now, what happens as a result of that? You generate, but you are still in the hands of the public sector, whereas distribution and transmission is concerned, and that is not always very efficient. Okay? Not only that, when you thought about generation, you thought about how to make it cheapest. And so, what was allocated were coal pit power plants. Now, having done all of that, suddenly it came to light that the allocation of the coal mines was not done properly. Now, instead of
Now it is by
after,
auctions. Now it is by auctions.
Now it is by auctions. But in those days, it was first come, first served. And there were a lot of controversies about being first come, first served, about having given wrong information. Now, the problem was, do you go after the ones that made the mistake, or do you do a complete cutoff and say that whole process is wrong and means disallocate all the mines? The government chose to do the latter. Now, when you do the latter...
Madam, that was Supreme Court, not the government.
The Supreme Court. You are right. I stand corrected. It was the Supreme Court. But the people who were representing to the Supreme Court were still the government's lawyers. Why was it that the government was not able to say that this is not the way to go about it? Because then what happens...
For the sins of 5%, 95% paid the
Yeah, exactly. It was like, you burn a city to catch a thief. You don't do that. You go after the thieves, surely, it is important, but you don't do it in a manner that everything goes wrong. And what happened was, all of the money that we had given, okay, was stuck because many of these power plants couldn't go ahead. Not only that, there was a power plant, for instance, on the west coast, which was completely completed accepting that it needed a transmission line. 28 kilometers of that passed through forest land. The phase 1 clearance from the Environment Ministry was there. And then somebody wrote some letter about it, and that phase 1 clearance was taken away. The power plant is complete, the investment is complete, you are not able to take away, you are not able to transmit the power out. Okay? Evacuate the power. Now, what happens to all of these? They all become NPAs. Similarly with road projects, with only 20% of land acquired, road projects were bid out. The borrowers as well as the actual promoters went ahead and funded it, and at the end of the day, at getting the rest of the land, you may get whatever you can, but in between there would be litigations because of places of worship or something or the other.
As a banker, were you not able to say no to these projects and we won't lend
No,
it?
that is what, when I came in, all of this had already happened. Okay, so I was cleaning up the mess, all right. And so we realized that a road may be complete up to the end of 75%, but at the 75th percent, there was some litigation. So the road was complete for the rest of it, but because it was not 80% complete, you couldn't start tolling. Tolling could be done only for 80%. So many of the recommendations we made to the government, in fact, I have spoken to Mr. Gadkari also. I said that unless I see 80% of land, contiguous land, already acquired, I will not fund a second project. I will simply not. Because there were so many things, in every one of these infrastructure projects which were not thought through. And for that matter, the only real infrastructure side that we did during my period was the green energy. And for the green energy, what I did was I took out a group, created a group, and I sent them to every multilateral development agency, including KfW, the European Central Bank, the ADB, to find out all the pitfalls that had happened in nations where they had done a lot of green energy in order to find out what are the risks. Because I wanted to ensure that whatever money we give, we don't take the risks which are not known to us.
So I'll come to green energy, but so let's conclude this part. You're saying how did you tackle with this mismatch between infrastructure loans, which are 20, 25-year duration, and the bank has only 10-year or 5-year money?
So what we suggested
were you pressured to take these big loans even though there's a asset, the time mismatch, the duration mismatch?
No, at that point of time when it was given, I don't think it was so much of pressure. I think it was a lack of understanding of risks. Okay? It was more a lack of understanding of risks. When we came in, for instance, I gathered several examples from other countries as to how infra loans are given. Infra loans are normally given with a 5-year period into 5. Yes, takeout finance. And we suggested and actually made out the case studies from at least 4 countries and gave it to the Reserve Bank of India to say this is the way it should be done, which is how the 25 into 5, the whole
5 by 25,
5 by 25 scheme came into being. It was on our recommendations, on the basis of case studies we had done. However, there was one problem. And that is Reserve Bank, instead of doing for the whole loan, what they said is we will allow this only for the capex portion of it. Okay? But the problem was because of the time overruns, and again, resulting from lack of planning on the side of everybody, what had happened was most of the projects had gone into a time overrun, meaning a cost overrun. And how do you manage a cost overrun? By taking short-term corporate loans. Okay? That's how the cost overrun was taken care of, because people didn't want the entire project to go down. But in the 20 by 5 loan or 25 by 5, I don't remember exactly, 5 by 25 loan, what the Reserve Bank said was we will allow the takeout financing only for the capex portion. But the main repayment was short-term corporate loans. If you couldn't repay the short-term corporate loans, it still became NPA.
So I'll come to the renewable energy stuff, but since you mentioned Reserve Bank, I'm tempted. It was supposed to come later in the conversation, but she's tempted me to. So 2013, which month did you take charge as chairman?
October.
Chairperson, October. And September, 1 month before you, this gentleman took charge as Reserve Bank of India
That's right.
governor.
Yes.
We are talking about this gentleman called Raghuram Rajan.
Yes.
I'm tempted to bring this incident because I was privileged to be invited to Madam's house. If you remember, when we gave a kind of a farewell to him. So in Germany, the more powerful person is not the Reserve Bank chairman. I mean, whatever it's called, Bundesbank chairman.
Bundesbank.
It's the Deutsche Bank chairperson. So in India, it would be Arundhati is more powerful than Raghuram Rajan. Was that the case in India?
I don't think so, excepting that, as Dr. Rajan said, he used to get a weekly letter from me. You remember him saying that, because I used to write to him almost regularly, telling him that this is not right or that is how it should be done. Sadly, the problem remained that while we gave very practical suggestions, many of them on account of Reserve Bank's own viewpoints and their conservative view were very different. And believe me, if you read Dr. Rajan's book, subsequently when he had written, the same things that I had recommended be done for our industry, he recommended that for Greece. He recommended that for the sovereigns, but not for our corporates. I often thought, that I must catch him and ask him that what is the difference between a corporate and a sovereign? That you made a different recommendation for them, but a different recommendation for us.
But he was very gracious at your function, I must say. So going back to renewable energy, since you mentioned that in renewable energy, the considerations are different. That is, what happens, by the way, in renewable energy, and Mr. Malik, I don't know if he's here. Yes, hi. He's our guru for all renewable. So what happens is that renewable energy is practically zero cost. OPEX is zero. You get free sunshine, but you have to put up all the costs up front and you recover that over 25 years.
That's right.
So that's, I think, was the thinking.
Yes.
But we have one state, and there's no, I'm not going to try and mention the name of the state. All 25, 30, 40,000 crores of investments went in. I'm sure the banks also funded it. And there was a change in government and they was just reneged all the contracts.
I know.
So how does the bank take care of this kind of risk?
So it is very difficult. It is extremely difficult to take care of all of this. Even for that matter, when in the road ministry, the HAM, that is the hybrid annuity
model.
Hybrid annuity model came in. They said that in case there is a change of promoter, that means a change of a person who's actually making the road, we will reimburse the bank only if the road is 40% complete. Now, as a result, we had to make a change in our policies to say that till 40% is complete, no loans would be available. For instance, it's happened in Maharashtra. It happened where the point of tolling was shifted. It was shifted in a manner that your toll receipts came down by a half. Now, unless and until we indicate a cash flow, there is no way that you're going to be able to repay. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, the moment you move the toll booth away, your cash flow changes. And then how do you manage the repayment? So the fact of the matter is, these are issues which I understand. There are public demands, but the backstop then has to be the government. If the government has to give in to the public demand because it is genuine and it is required, then the government has to take the responsibility also of making sure that the repayments come on time. Contracts, I think, have to be sacrosanct. Once you make a contract, it has to be sacrosanct. Yes, if there is something fraudulent to it, of course it has to be taken to task, and of course people who are not doing the right things.
So one last question on this, that because State Bank is so big and it's public sector, and I think it's going to remain public sector, I think under your charge the merger happened, right?
Yes.
So it's going to be subject to pressure from the polity, right, or the government. How did you manage to retain some kind of autonomy? I want to slip in this, this little cheekily. Of course, we are very proud that as a woman you were a chairperson. But look what happened to the Mahila Bank. and you had to kind of fold it into your. I think it happened during your period.
Yes.
So Mahila Bank was launched, for the people who don't know. This was a women's bank which was launched with much fanfare, and then I think it had something like some 75% NPAs, or very large number. So State Bank of India was left holding the baby, and they had to fold it in, and now of course it's part of SBI. So these kind of political pressures, because you're a public sector bank, you have to pursue social objectives and economic objectives. How is this balancing done?
So, our mission when I had joined the bank was profit with growth. Very simple mission. Today, or rather the vision. Today, the vision is much longer and it's difficult for me to remember. But I think, profit with growth really and truly epitomized what we were supposed to be. See, I have never ever thought that any of the bigger missions that we are given, so whether it be PMJDY, whether it be merger, that they were wrong. They were absolutely the right thing. In fact, regarding the merger, when I became chairman, I approached personally to say that I would like to do the merger.
The Seven Sisters?
Yes, the Seven Sisters, the Mahila Bank was added on later on. And the Mahila Bank was added on because at that point of time they realized that while the requirement was huge,
So was it a mistake, Mahila Bank?
I won't say that it was a mistake, but I think the way they wanted to scale it was not right. If you look at Seva in Gujarat, it's a Mahila bank. They're doing excellently well. So you had to have the right perspective as to how to do it. Setting it up in the metros was probably not the right way. Setting it up in the rural areas was probably the right way, the way Seva has gone about it. They've made a great job of it. But the way it was set up at that point of time was probably not the right way. They were too small to make a difference, way too small to make a big difference, and they needed much more firepower in order to, really scale. And in any case, those were the things that we were doing as well. So to some extent, I would say that merging it was the right decision. But
So I want to wrap this up before I go to this women aspect of the economy. Is that public sector banking? This is a big question that for, I think, at least last 25 years, we have been discussing whether to privatize banks. We, of course, come a long way. We used to have 27 public sector banks. Now I think we are down to 12 or 11. So that's happened through mergers. But there was a finance minister of India who on the floor of the parliament said, we are going to reduce the public sector ownership down to 33%. Remember, that was almost
Yes.
20 years ago.
Yes.
But we will retain the public sector character. But even today, we still are nowhere near that. So do you think, two questions. One is, does ownership matter? And secondly, isn't it high time that we seriously think about more privatization of banks?
So, I have always said that, the public sector has its own strengths and the private sector has its own strengths. And you can see that merger of that in some of our subsidiaries. If you look at some of our subsidiaries, whether it be SBI Life, whether it be SBI Mutual Fund, they're doing, SBI Mutual Fund is the number one. When I came in as chairman, SBI Mutual Fund had been number 6 for 10 long years. Okay? It's today number one. When I came in, SBI Life was one of the sort of runners-up. Today,
This is run purely as a private sector entity. What she means, I just want to emphasize that, yes.
but they have public sector values. They may be run as private sector entities, but they have absolutely public sector values. And the chair of those institutions come from SBI. And frankly speaking, the chair of all of these, or rather the MDs of all of these institutions, make about 1/20th of what their juniors do. Okay? So people over there, the MDs, normally their salaries are not to be mentioned because their salaries means like since the time we were assistant general managers, we stopped looking at our pay slips because they never went up. And I make a joke that, when I got a increment in Lucknow, I was in Lucknow then, I called my husband and I said, I got my increment today. He said, great, let's go out and celebrate. So I said, yeah, let's go for a movie. And that time, the new malls had come up. So Wave was a mall in Lucknow. So I said, let's go to Wave. But the only thing is, I'll be able to buy only my ticket and my daughter's ticket. Yours you have to buy on your own. So he said, ye kaise, why this partiality? I said, that's the amount of my increment. That's all I can afford. So, these are the kinds of things. But having said that, none of us ever thought that to be a deterrent. None of us ever thought of that as something that we regretted. A lot of people have asked me, why didn't you come out much earlier? But I enjoyed what I did. And I was not changed to my desk or something of the sort. I could have left earlier, but I enjoyed it. So, if you ask me about privatization, I would say that still today, even today in India, there are certain government initiatives that are very important. So even if you privatize the public sector banks, certain programs like the PMJDY are absolutely worth taking up. And for that, the government needs to have the ability to push it through the public sector.
So people who don't know, Prime Minister's Jan Dhan Yojana, I believe 95 or 97% of the accounts, some 200 million accounts have been opened, but 95% of them, or 97%, have been opened by public sector banks. So the private sector banks have opened only 2 or 3% of the accounts.
And that also, I remember one of the leading private sector bank MDs, I was in a lift going down and I was telling him, what is happening? I say, we are doing all the work. What about y'all? Why don't y'all pitch in? And he laughed, he smiled at me and he said, yeah, it's nice. Y'all open the accounts, let them mature, we'll come in then. So,
no, I mean, it's amazing because the Jam Trinity, which is the subject of every economic survey and so many politicians take credit for it, but the Jam Trinity works on Jan Dhan Yojana and 97% of it is done by private sector banks. So, but I think this is a bigger topic, so I'm not going to push you too much on this. Let me quickly change to this women. We are very proud and happy that you were the chairperson of India's largest bank. By the way, she's also mentioned, I think, in the Forbes list of the 25 most powerful women in the world, and the Fortune list, and India Today list. So, it's great. But the reality, and women pilots I mentioned in the beginning, but the reality is that in India, and the amount of women's participation in the labor force, that is, women who get paid for work, we are the lowest among all the G20. Lower than Saudi Arabia. 20% is less than 20%. So, I mean, how does one understand this? What's the challenge?
It's like showing a red rag to a bull. So, I could take hours on this, but
at least a few minutes, if you can.
Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, it's one of those very sad things which I think, we need a national movement to change this around. There are so many good, women who are retiring and who I constantly try to get on the boards of various organizations. And I remember one of the persons telling me, no, you have to give me a C-suite person, means either an MD or a chairman. So I asked him, how many women do you know have become MD and chairman? Unless and until you give these people who have retired as CGMs a position in your board, you will not be able to bring about the numbers in the boards that you need. So give them a chance. And this was in respect of a lady who had retired as my DMD of digital banking. And he wanted an MD. In spite of that, I insisted. So because maybe, he wanted to listen to me, so he agreed. Today, she's on the board of 4 of his companies. And he tells me that she's the only one who comes thoroughly prepared and makes really good contributions. The fact of the matter is, there is a strange feeling that if you're not a MD or if you're not a very high level executive on the board, you will not be able to contribute, which is not true. The fact is that women just have not come up to that level to that extent to be able to sit in places where they can start making a difference. That is one. The second thing is, and this is again a realization after I have come into the private sector, one of the good things of the private sector. In my company, if you want to take an interview, you have to be certified with a course called unconscious bias. And when I actually took the course, I found that even a person like me has bias. Okay? So I thought I was unbiased towards women. As I went through the course, I realized that I also have preconceived notions about women. So it's very important for us to understand this unconscious bias that is working amongst us, which makes it difficult for people to judge between a man and a woman with the same caliber and the same credentials and promote the woman, because there is always a feeling that the woman is prioritizing family over work, which is actually not the case.
So you mean to say people bring assumptions कि इसको तो नहीं जमेगा?
Exactly. They bring assumptions. They bring assumptions that she is not senior enough to be this. In fact, even when I was getting promoted, I remember, in fact, I was very lucky at that point of time that there was a lady who was the deputy governor of RBI, and there was a lady who was the chief of HR in my bank. And at that particular interview, though people agreed that I should be promoted, they thought I was too young to get promoted and I could do it the next year. And in fact, these two ladies fought very hard for me and said, we need some young people also to come up, and just because she's a woman, why should she be held back? And I wasn't held back, which was a miracle, but which enabled me to become the chairman ultimately. But if I didn't have ladies to fight for me there, it wouldn't have happened. So you need more and more women to go up there to fight, to give a voice to the thousands of people who don't have a voice. And today we have not enabled that. By whatever reason, for whatever reason,
It's
we have
gone
not
down.
enabled.
We have to acknowledge, whether we like it or not, it's gone down by 10 percentage point over the last 20 years.
Yes.
It's gone from 32 to 22%.
Yes.
It's a long-term phenomenon. So it's not something which has happened overnight.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
going down.
So if you consider during COVID times, nowadays youngsters, both spouses are working, okay, but the children were also supposed to be getting schooled at home, okay. Now, whose job was it to ensure that the children were sitting in front of a screen and not falling asleep? It was always the mother's job, okay. So she was actually putting off the. In fact, I asked a few of my women employees that, why do you have the video off all the time? And she would say that, ma'am, I'm actually multitasking. There are two children over there, one of whom is doing cartwheels and the other is falling asleep. I have to keep poking them so that they look at the screen instead. And I have to do my job. I'm listening in to what y'all are saying, but I have to do these as well. Half the time the screen is in my kitchen, because at that point of time we were not allowing any of the home caretakers, etc., to come in on account of COVID. So I have to do the cooking, I have to do this job, I have to look after my children. And so many of them dropped out of the workforce at that point of time. And we couldn't make anything out of them. In fact, when I was heading HR for a little while, the reason I brought in this 2-year sabbatical,
I mentioned that. She
Yeah.
brought in a 2-year sabbatical for women during her chairmanship.
Yeah, and that was not only for childcare, it was also for elderly care. Because I found that many of them were giving up their jobs because their parents or parents in law were falling sick. And many of them were so guilty about the fact that these people had helped them bring up their kids, enabled them to be in the job for 20 years, and when they are helpless, they have to go out of the house and leave them in the hands of the caretakers. They couldn't bear the guilt. They left the job. And I remember one such lady coming up to me and telling me that, but for you, I would have lost a career of 22 years. My mother-in-law was very sick. She had helped me throughout my journey. So I felt bad about leaving her at home. But because of your sabbatical, I took 1 year's leave. Unfortunately, she passed away in 3 months' time, and I could get back to my job. But if it had not been for the sabbatical, I'd have given up my job. My 22 years of career would have gone down the line. Yeah. But it's sad that nobody else has replicated that.
No, this is a very major public policy challenge, and we must learn from other economies like Japan, who recognize that when the woman has her first child, the probability of her dropping out of the labor force is 60-70%. So if you make arrangements for those 3-4 years where the initial years of childcare, then they come back. I think some companies are doing that. I'm sort of
Not only come back, they come back with so much of loyalty to the organization. You know, they work double to make up for whatever time they have been.
and it's a huge asset which we miss out. It happens with doctors. 50%, more than 50, even in our institute, actually 70% of the incoming population of students, toppers, are women. So if you look at MBBS, 50% of the graduating class is women, but only 15% of the practicing doctors in the country are women. So they're being lost. That asset is being lost to society. But madam, I'm aware of the time constraints, so we are going to just quickly wrap up to the last segment because we want to talk about the future. Now, I know that you are in a very, sort of for 20, $30 billion company, so global champion. We want to talk about the future of finance, future of things like fintech, blockchain, technology, especially in India. India, we think, is financial sector needs deepening. And you've actually spent your lifetime in finance. What is your vision? What do you think needs to happen in India? I mentioned that because I believe just last week there's been discussion how India's savings rate is falling, alarmingly low. The India's savings rate, by the way, that is the amount of financial saving that households are putting in, net financial, are at a 50-year low. I hope the audience in this knows about this. This is not something very comfortable. But we need our financial savings ratio to go up. We need newer instruments, innovations. So what is the role of finance in the India's future growth? What innovations do we need, and what are the public policy choices we need to make finance relevant?
So, you know something, because now I'm in technology, and even earlier, I used to believe very strongly that unless you have a very strong technology backbone, no industry can survive. No industry. Not even an NGO can survive without a strong technology backbone. And today, that is feasible. Now, for instance, if you look at individual talent in the digital space or in the IT space, India is one of the leaders. Okay, when I entered this company that I am in right now, we had only 2,200 people over here. Today we are 10,000 plus. And the reason for that is they have begun to realize that the depth of talent that is available in India is far superior to any other country. There is no country in the world today that is graduating more than 1 million engineers per year. Now, I'm not saying that all the engineers are of equal level or all are equally trainable, but definitely out of that million, 200,000, 300,000 are very good. And if they can be picked up and they can be skilled, they can do almost anything at the same level as any other country or any other nation. Now, having said that, if you look at industry, I'm not taking the startup industry. The startup industry is very digitally savvy. But the legacy industry is very slow still to adopt the new technologies. And I've had a talk with various regulators, with the government, and everywhere they have told me that we have never told industry not to accept this. Why are they not doing it? Now, the problem is many a times if they are not doing it, you need a prod. You need some kind of action to get them to do it. For instance, in Singapore, if in the financial sector you adopt the newest technologies, you actually get rewarded. You actually get incentivized. Yeah, that's the prod. You get incentivized. Here, they will not say you do it, but they will not say you can't do it either. And I'm talking now of the public sector banks. In the public sector banks, if you look at the way that they are adopting cloud technology, and you can understand that without cloud, you cannot have a strong technology backbone because the amount of data that is required to be crunched, the capacity that is required, it cannot be created on-prem. It's too capital intensive. You cannot do it. You have to do it on the cloud. But somehow or the other, this feeling of insecurity of having a public cloud is something that we are not able to really explain to them. That a public cloud doesn't mean that you are hanging out your washing to dry for everybody to have a look. That itself is an idea that has not yet taken root. But unless it takes root, if you look at today's generative AI that is coming in, and maybe, the artificial general intelligence, AGI as they call it, is coming in, the amount of data that is required to be gone through in order to come up with your, with your predictions or with your directions, it is not feasible unless you adopt the latest of the technologies.
Have you been able to convert at least one public sector company to?
Yes, very luckily, I must tell you that one of the public sector banks, for the first time, we have just received the GEM notification that we have been able to convert them.
Wonderful,
But that is the first. But all the other, even the other public sector units, not only the banks, they need to understand that technology today is proceeding at a breakneck speed. We ourselves are finding it difficult to keep track of what is happening on a daily basis. We used to patch once in 4 months. Today we patch once in 2 weeks. The changes are coming so rapidly. And believe me, a lot of it will be beneficial for us if we can use it in the right way. Like any other weapon, it can be misused. But like any other weapon, it can be used for the right purposes also.
Okay.
Like, not only financial sector, you take the social sector. In the social sector today, you have a class, okay, of 65 students, and you expect them to march in step. What happens? Some people fall behind. Some people who can go far ahead are kept behind, held behind. But if you could create individual curricula for 65 students, imagine what kind of potential it could unleash. Absolutely possible. Absolutely possible. You go to the state hospitals, see the kind of pressure that the doctors are under. They are hardly able to look at you and somehow or the other prescribe something. If much of the original work is done by generative AI, the doctors can then actually connect with people like they used to in our childhood. I remember in our childhood, if I fell sick and the doctor walked in through the door, my temperature would automatically go down. And I look at that bottle of syrup and my temperature would go totally. Today, it's not the case. Today, we hardly get to see the doctors. They don't have time. 5 minutes, they don't even touch you. They simply say, get these blood tests done, get an appointment for the operation, and that's it. Out you go. Now, there is so much that we can do with technology. But even in finance, if you are looking at finance, a lot of finance depends upon understanding risks, monitoring risks, and mitigating them. Now, this understanding, monitoring, and mitigating can only happen when you have far more data sets to go through to tell you what exactly are the problems, which we didn't have. In fact, in my 4 years as chairman, and you were there, you have interviewed me then, never once did I give a number as a guidance. I gave an upward guidance or a downward guidance, but never a number. Because all the numbers that were coming to me were intuitive numbers. There was no real, working behind them. Today, in my company, I know to the decimal point where I am going to land at the end of the quarter. Because every day, the guidance is coming in based on the kind of notes that people are taking. And now people don't even have to take notes. They just have to, record the conversations. It will pick up from the conversations, from the tone, from the words used as to how likely you are to close a deal or not close a deal.
Yeah.
It's come to that level.
Absolutely. So, Madam, of course, we would like to hear you a lot, but I think time constraints. So, we have some time away for a few questions. It's okay if you take some questions, but before I go to the audience, I want to ask a question. So, next step for you, Finance Minister, maybe?
Nothing of the sort.
Because, anyway. So, we have a few minutes for a question. Yeah. Amit, yeah. Please use the mic. Please be brief and identify yourself, please.
Amit Paranspe, thank you for sharing some amazing insights. I have a question on the area that wasn't discussed a whole lot. For a customer like me, we also look at the B2C side of the bank. Absolutely. And would like to get your views on that, especially how it has evolved. I mean, in the 1980s, the banks were in a much worse off shape as far as the end consumer was concerned. Now they're a little better with technology, but we continue to have a lot of issues, and especially with the public sector banks. So your views on that, how that's transferred, how that needs to transform further.
So, a cousin of mine, when I became chairman, told me that I'll consider you successful only if you can improve customer service. Okay. I don't know how successful I was. I don't think I was very successful. It's been the, requirement for every single chairman to continue with trying to improve customer service. But today, the B2C area, just like I told you about the students, today, if I can get your data from the account aggregators, okay, I can actually give a differential price to you instead of a uniform, say, housing loan price. Earlier, what used to happen? In the retail space, everybody used to get the same price, depending upon tenure and the amount of the loan. Okay? Today, I can make a different price for you, and thereby what will happen is you will stop subsidizing the corporate sector. The corporate sector, because of the size, they are able to squeeze the margins. The retail sector, because they don't have the muscle of the data that you have, they are not able to squeeze the price. But if your data is really, really good, you would be now in a position, if a bank really accepted this kind of technology, they would be able to make a separate price from you, from another person who's much more risky, and therefore their prices would be higher. But it would still be better than a uniform slab-wise pricing. So if you look at B2C today, B2C actually is going to become better and better. Plus, with generative AI, actually speaking, we used to have bots where, after the first three queries, it would get transferred to an agent. You don't need to transfer it to an agent now. The bots can solve everything for you. Okay, right down to the last bit, unless it is really, really complicated, at which time the human being comes in. But the fact of the matter is the B2C experience is only going to get better.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, ma'am. Nidhi Danju. Pleasure, big fan of you. Just wanted to take on your conversation around women participation. What do you think the future will look like? And there was also an instance where you mentioned in 2006 you almost thought that you're going to quit, but your mentor stopped you, and I think it was a male mentor who stopped you. And just your reflection on that, because I've read the story, but I would love to know a little bit more. Thank you.
So just to add to our question, how do we reverse this decline in the labor force?
So, for reversing this decline in the labor force, I think we need a number of policy decisions. You have to support women with flexi work. In 2015, when I brought in this policy, I also brought in a platform that allowed women to work from home. Because what happened with this policy was, if you took the 2 year sabbatical, you also lost 2 years seniority. Okay, and that used to hurt. Because my batchmate is going ahead and I know I'm as good as my batchmate. Because I've had to take sabbatical, I have to lose 2 years seniority. Why that? So I remember in 2015 on the 8th of March, Women's Day, we launched a platform that would allow work from home. But there was a lot of resistance, not only from the men but also from the women, saying if you allow people to work from home, they will only surf the internet and they will play on the web or do whatever else, and they will not be productive. Today, COVID, the little silver lining we have got, has shown that you can be just as productive. So, flexi work in these situations is absolutely necessary.
You're aware of Abenomics, right? Prime Minister Abe, who
Yeah.
said so there was a huge national movement to increase the labor force participation of women.
Yeah.
About the flexi work and also creche, publicly supported good quality creches.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that is very necessary. But in India, there are 3 times in the life of a woman I have found when they normally leave their jobs. One is when they have their children, the childbearing years. The second is when the child is between the classes of 10 and 12, because they're preparing for their IITs and their exams. So that time the woman is supposed to chauffeur the child around, give him complan at the right times, waking up at 3 in the morning. All of that is the mother's job. Mother doesn't do it, she gets blamed if the child doesn't get through. Okay, so that mentality has to change. And I'm glad to see that, fine. Third is the elderly. That's absolutely the case. But I am glad to say that today I'm working with a much younger population, and this population, the men seem to be quite involved. Okay, And we have, by the way, leave for paternity leave as well of 12 weeks, in which we also ensure that, they're actually, their spouses are going back to work and they're not taking it just for the heck of taking it. But it works. It works. They understand the difficulties of raising a child, and their involvement with the child goes up much more. So I think, we have to have policies that really and truly empower women to stay in the workforce. Not only that, we also have to give them a lot of courage to say that, yes, I can do it. In a group of 10, if they are all similarly placed, and I put a big challenge, if there are, say, 5 men and 5 women, all 5 men's hands will go up to volunteer for that challenge. Only 2 out of the 5 women will put up their hand. Why? Because they're doubting themselves. This doubting yourself also, it is something that the women themselves must sort of prime themselves for. If they keep doubting themselves, it won't happen.
Ma'am, I'm tempted, just we'll take 2 or 3 more questions. I'm tempted to add to what you said, your message, just 2 economic points. One is, if the women's participation in the labor force goes from 20% for India to, say, 35%, which is very low, by the way, it should go up to 50, but say 35. And if the women are paid the same wages as the men for the same work, just these 2 corrections. Increase the labor force participation, make it parity. India's GDP will go up by 30%.
Yes.
30. Just these 2 things.
So
Anyway.
I'll just add to this, Salesforce is supposed to be a very progressive kind of a company. Okay, Mark Benioff, when he started it, he said, business is a platform for change and things like that. So he ordered, few years back, audit regarding gender pay parity. And he was so sure that there was no disparity, he said that go ahead and do it, even though HR said that if we find disparity, you will have to cough up cool cash. Remember that. And if you want that, then only we will do this. He said, I'm 100% sure there is no disparity, go ahead and do it. He ended up spending $5 million to bring about pay parity. Till date, Salesforce has spent $22 million to bring about pay parity. It's a yearly audit that happens. Yearly audit. So, you have to walk the talk if you're really saying this. Unless you walk the talk, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, just one comment and one question. One comment is on what you said about privatization. I mean, I'm sure you're aware SBI had the highest profit across all sectors last quarter. So clearly there's a case for keeping it as it is. The question, Arundhati, is, I mean, the G20 as well as recently Larry Summers, everybody's hyping up the MDBs, the multilateral development banks. So do you really think there is a big future for MDBs?
So MDBs are actually required. At the end of the day, there has to be cooperation between nations, because not every nation will go through the same cycle. There will be nations that will be at the bottom of the cycle. There will be nations at the other end of the cycle. So to that extent, multilateral development agencies are required, because, the strong has to support the weak and the weak has to support the strong. We are, after all, a connected world. No matter how much we may think otherwise, there are things that, that impact the entire world, even if it's in a small place. Greece impacted the world in a very different way, and it's a very small country. Ukraine. Look at Ukraine. Who would have thought that Ukraine would have had such a huge impact on the entire country or entire, globe? So to that extent, I think these are important. Connected institutions are very important today. Even for climate change. Climate change doesn't recognize what is the border between India and Pakistan and China and anything else. So if you're going to do something about that, you need these agencies to press this, policies that impact all countries. And that is why I think MDBs have their role.
My name is Abhay Bodhi, and we are providing financial services as per banks and NBFC as the channel partner and DSA. What do you say, ma'am, about the digital transformations will take future of India in the fintech and all this, the way we are growing?
I think ma'am has already said a lot, but anyway, go ahead.
No, but it is the high point of India. We have more than 2,100 fintechs in the country.
So in terms
And believe me, the kind of innovation you all are bringing about, if The legacy institutions are not aware. You'll eat their lunch from beneath them and they will not even understand. So I think, the fintechs, they are doing hugely well on, on the innovation piece. I, however, feel, the best way would be if you could collaborate with the established institutions. You have the innovation and the agility. They have the trust and the balance sheet. So the two together would be a formidable combination.
Hello, I'm Neil Burati. I'm a financial journalist. So my question is your thoughts on insurance mis-selling by banks. Today, if you walk into any bank branch in the country, the first thing that you're sold is insurance because the commissions on insurance are so high compared to other financial products. So what needs to be done there?
So ma'am, this is the last question. I know this is people, but we are short of time. So I just want to add by saying, of course, while Arundhati ma'am represents the banking sector primarily, what she has, as she mentioned, SBI Life, she mentioned mutual fund. So capital markets, insurance, banking, this is the entire landscape. In fact, pensions and everything. And clearly, a very large area of India's financial sector is the insurance sector. Today, I believe it's the 3 lakh, the life fund is 60 lakh crores, almost 1/5 of our, GDP. So that's of course a big, and then there was this whole episode of how people were selling these ULIPs, unit linked insurance plans, which in the guise of selling insurance, you were actually selling investment products, and there was mis-selling. So I think the question is in that direction.
No, absolutely. You know something, when I first came in, the gentleman at that point of time who was heading SBI Life was a batchmate of mine, and he was, I came in October, he was supposed to retire in July. So I told him that I will not give you a proper, retirement function unless you do something about this mis-selling. And the way we came about it is that any premium above 5,000 rupees, before you close the sale, there would be a call from headquarters, a recorded call, where the person from headquarters would explain the risks of what that person was doing, ask whether they understood the risk and still wanted to go ahead with it, and only then the sale would close, not otherwise. Okay? So this was the first step that we had taken in order to rein in mis-selling. Having said that, if you look at the insurance world, why is insurance penetration so little in India? One of the reasons was our joint family system, which provided an insurance of its own. Something happens to somebody, there is the joint family that will gather together and give support to that particular unit. Today, the joint family system is no longer there. But somehow or the other, Indians have a mentality that if they are paying something, they want something back in return. They don't want it to happen after their death. Tab kaun dekhne wala? That's not their thing. Their thing is that what is it that I'll get back? And as a result, the investment product has come into being. It's a question of explaining also to Indians that insurance is meant for protection, not for investment. It is for protection at your retirement. It is for protection for medical emergencies. It is for protection of your family. That is what you need to look, not for immediate returns. So this again needs a sustained, perception change and a understanding by the population as to what they are doing before you can bring it into control. But this is something I think that's a very big need for our population.
Anyway, on that note, a wonderful conversation with Madam Arundhati. Please give her a warm applause. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. It was a very interesting and informative session today. I now call Dr. Vijay Kelkar to give his closing remarks.
Srimati Bhattacharya, our distinguished chief guest, Ajit Ranade, who had given a scintillating session with our chief guest, my senior colleague Dr. Mashilkar, and friends. I had the most educative 60 minutes in my life this evening.
Oh, wow.
I think I wish I had met you when I was finance secretary also. could have done my job probably much better. Two things I want to mention which have helped us. One is that, as pointed out earlier we bring out a book every year. And we were debating what should be the book for next year because we saw our 2 books. And debate was going on whether one of the suggestions was we write essays on Nari Shakti, besides the problem. And what you said, I really fortified that this we will do. And this is, I want to thank you for providing us the inspiration and the push. And first port of call, Ganesh, will have to be her regarding our book.
I already thought about it.
Yeah, where Ganesh would be has kindly agreed to pilot this endeavor. The other point I want to mention before I conclude that to share with our colleagues here a good news that Srimati Bhattacharya has kindly agreed to our request to become one of our honorary members of the PIC. She'll continue to be associated with us, maybe making more demand in our time, but we'll ensure it's on the weekend next time. We'll get it on the weekdays. And last point is that all this lectures we put on our YouTube. So this is probably one of the most popular YouTube presentation by PIC, and thanks to because of you. So as I mentioned to you, that I will be coming to you back to you again and again for the PIC's future programs, and we look forward to your continued help and guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelkar. On behalf of Pune International Center, I, Geeta, extend a really hearty vote of thanks to our chief guest, Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, who spared time from her busiest schedule to grace the occasion today. We had the opportunity to hear your thoughts, and this will undoubtedly inspire us in our upcoming activities. Before I sign off, I want to give a big thank you to all of you present here today and all those who have worked tirelessly to make this event a success. Thank you. With this, I conclude the program today. Thank you.